Hey, what's up guys, Guardian here, coming you guys with a deck profile today, going over my Alden deck. So, I haven't profiled Alden yet on the channel, for a good reason. I was actually playing around with this deck when set 5 came out, more so because I was actually considering taking this deck to BCS Cardiff recently, and in the end decided not to. Of course, if you saw my post, I took Undercover with me instead. But Alden was a deck that I was testing for about 3 weeks or so, and I was pretty solid on it with taking it as my choice for the event. But yeah, last minute or last week or so, decided to swap over. So this is basically the deck I would have taken to the event if I didn't take Undercover with me. So yeah, so this build is going to be more so on the competitive side. It will have Keter pile and stuff like that, so you can expect that. But if you guys would like to see a non-pile version of the deck, maybe with just Sergion in it, I could maybe put a deck log for that in the description, if any of you would like that. But otherwise, yeah, this is basically like my competitive version of Alden. So, to start with, we have the ride line. So with it, of course, we have the remakes of like Tranquilla and Sodios, with some really good upgrades in them. So the Tranquilla, when you ride on top of it with the Grade 2 Sodios, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and you can add any Grade 1 or greater card from among them to your hand, and if you don't, you get energy charge 2. That can actually help you, the energy charge 2, if you don't end up adding a card to hand, but the nice thing with this is that it gets us to our T-Folds and also our Wisdom of Beginning, because both of those cards are grade 2, and it just refers to any card. So not a unit specifically, but any card. So it allows us to add the order if we don't already have it. So very good flexibility there. So Alden's actually one of those ride lines where it can actually play the Keter pile and be a little bit more consistent than other decks, basically, which is pretty good. Then, of course, Sodios, when you ride on top of him with your Alden, you get to Soul Blast 1, look at top 5 of your deck, and choose any grade 3 or less card, and call it to rear, and then shuffle the deck. Pretty good when fetching for specific pieces, since, of course, Alden, the gimmick that he has basically allows you to bounce anything that you call to the field through his skills, basically, whether it's the Counterblast skill or the Soul Blast skill. But we'll go more so into that as I move on over to the main deck, since we do have the Persona rides for Alden, of course. Funnily enough, actually one of the targets that you could call to the field, if you haven't already seen it earlier, you could call Alden to the board and then call over it by counterblasting, calling a unit, and then bouncing the called over unit back to your hand. So that then gives you a Persona ride setup for your turn 4, which is really good. But yeah, Alden, a CB1 to draw is always really nice. Make sure that you have a pretty decent hand size for most of the time, and also giving the unit that you call 10k, and it lasting until the end of your opponent's turn. It's pretty nice so that they can't like swing into it, so it's a bit harder to like clear your board that way. And also they can't retire it either for any decks that may retire. But of course, if they have a control mechanic that isn't retire, then you're kind of snookered there. So it is what it is. But of course, Alden has a Divine skill as well, which is really good. It's a Soul Blast 1 for a top 7 check to call 2 units, call them to rear, and then they can't be retired until the end of your opponent's next turn. So with this Divine skill, we're more so kind of just using that straight away. There's no real reason to hold onto it. And with it being a Soul Blast, we pretty much always have access to it as well. Like, there's no way to deny us having the opportunity to use the Divine skill, which is really good, because with the early game, we're more so looking to use like a counterblast for like the Wisdom play to draw 2, call 2, which means we can use the Soul Blast skill for Alden to then maybe dig deeper into the deck for like a countercharge outlet, just in case the opponent is planning to CB deny us, for our early game rush, basically. So yeah, Alden, very solid, good baseline, and just helps us plus a lot in the early game and be very aggressive. So yeah, and do remember that because these units are being called via Alden's skills, anything that you call on top of through that effect will then bounce back to your hand, which is what gives you a bit more utility when calling stuff down with things like your Sodios on the ride line. So yeah, you could fetch things like Perfect Guards, any shield cards or anything like that, or just pieces in general, bounce them back to your hand, and then set your board up from there. So yeah, that's it for Alden. So we'll move on over to the next grade 3, which is going to be 4 copies of our Resianel, which is the main attack extender for the deck. So with her, you get to Energy Blast 4 whenever she's placed to draw a card. So pretty much replaces herself when you call it, so you can help make a board pretty easily, pretty good. And then when you place a unit on top of her via your Alden's ability, the called unit gets 10,000 power. And then also, as long as your opponent's grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast 1 to stand one of your rear guards. So whether that's, of course, the typical choice being a rear guard in the other column, so you can get 5 attacks. Alternatively, you could stand something in the back row to maybe get a better sort of column with a booster, but that's kind of few and far between. We're mostly going for the 5 attacks to get as much pressure as possible. But yeah, the EB4, although it sounds heavy, it's pretty good. You know, like, we don't really spend energy elsewhere in the deck, so getting a draw from her is pretty good for building hand size and maintaining some card advantage as well, whilst building the board up. So yeah, I did try to get cute with this and try and only play 3, because the one issue I find with her is that once you get one of them into rotation, you kind of don't need another one, because you can just keep calling the one that you bounce back next turn and always have one. So the other ones kind of feel a little bit redundant, but you kind of need to play 4 because of consistency. You just need to see it, because I had games where when I had 3 of them, I just didn't see it, and then, you know, even with 4, sometimes I don't see it. So yeah, we want max consistency to see this, to attack as many times as we can. So yeah, 4 copies of Resianel. And then honestly, one of the stars of this deck, which I absolutely love, is 3 copies of Sargis. So I put Sargis in the deck because one thing I noticed with this deck is that it really needs something to be unfair. The numbers in this deck are like moderate to like good, in terms of like, you can get like 30k, 40k, sometimes 50k columns, depending on the power alignments that you've got. But with Sargis, it's really nice because with this, you can poke with him early game, not use his skill, and then when you're going into that multi-attack with the Resianel, Sargis will be like one of the last attacks that you swing, and if any point the opponent takes a damage and gets a defensive, the Sargis is going to get absolutely huge. And yeah, that's big for this type of deck, where you're giving out so many attacks, you kind of want a really big swing going at the opponent to try and seal the game off, basically. But another aspect of Sargis that I love is it's also a defensive card as well, because it has the ability to gain 10k shield as well as 10k power if the opponent gets an aggressive trigger against us. So it's a good power outlet, but also a good defensive tool as well in those niche situations where we do need to guard with him. So that is also good. And he's also a soul charge outlet for when we do at times need the soul for the Resianel, which can also come up. So yeah, that's why I pretty like Sargis, because he's really good aggression, as well as a nice flexible defensive tool in the right circumstance. So yeah, Sargis was really, really good. I love playing him in this deck. Now, that is it for the grade 3s. So for the grade 2s, we of course have the usual things here. We have 4 copies of Tearfault, being part of the Keter pile, of course. The filtering this provides is just incredible. Of course, we all know what this card does by now, but it also hits good numbers, which is the other aspect of this deck that I really wanted to focus on, was making sure that we always have decent power and decent aggression going at the opponent. And Tearfault does all that. You know, it gives us card advantage, gives us early game, which is the main thing there. Early game for this deck is very few and far between without this, so this gives us a bit more leeway to do such thing in the early game. So yeah, so we have 4 copies of her, and then next to her we have 3 copies of Ermac, which is pretty much one of the main call targets for Alden to call down, because with the 10k you're getting from Alden, the 10k from Resianel, and his skill giving 15k, that's a 35k increase. That's not even including Persona Ride, so 45, 55k, you know, 60, you know, 68. These are the type of numbers we're going to be expecting with this. So this is also a really good power outlet and a good finisher to go along with the Sargis. just to make sure that we're connecting these attacks out with our rear guards. So yeah, Ermac, really good target to go along with the T-Fault, since they're both pretty good swingers as well. And then, of course, to wrap the grade 2s up, we have the 4 copies of the Wisdom of Beginning. This is to help us get a bit more of an early game, as well as help us dig for pieces. Like, getting things like the Persona Ride is super important, and also just seeing things to help fill our hand up to make sure we've got enough resources. Also really good. And one thing I like more with the order build, with like Wisdom of Beginning and T-Fault in this deck, is that my Surgions are always going to be live, which is one of the frustrations that I found while playing a non-order package in this deck, is that you can sometimes find your Surgions, as good as this card is, to just not be live. And if you go against a deck that builds a board, because this deck has no removal, like innately with its skills, you sometimes like have to attack with a rear guard to kill a rear guard just to make this live, and it's kind of frustrating. So by playing the order package in this deck, it makes it a little bit easier to, you know, be carefree less, basically, with it. So yeah, that is a benefit of having this in the deck. And then the last grade 2 of the deck is the 1 Twin Cast, which I think is really good. It's also an add target that you could get from the grade 1, since you can add any grade 2 or greater card. So if you already have the T-Vault and the Wisdom, you could just add Twin Cast for some more defensive purposes, or maybe just, you know, add an Ermac if you want an Ermac, you know? So Twin Cast is just good overall for being able to block multiple attacks at times, and just overall having more defensive value in the deck, since we do have a fair bit of grade 3s in here as well. But like I say, it's cards like this and the Sargis which allow me to get away with these sort of ratios, since the shield value is still there, basically. So yeah. So that's it for the grade 2s. So we'll move on over to the grade 1s. Of course, I already mentioned them before, but we have 4 copies of Surgion, the boy of Keter, basically. Yeah, amazing card, obviously. Don't need to explain it too much. But being able to hit those really aggressive columns early game, make it so that the opponent can't really guard your Vanguard swings without being inoptimal. Very crucial to get that early game damage in, but then also just fetching for pieces as well. Very, very important. And yeah, Surgion, good card. You know, we all know Surgion by now, trust me. To go alongside him, we do have another dog, though, in Gragion. So this card is basically a countercharger, which says continuous if you have placed a unit this turn from your DivineZ skill unit. He gains the ability of the end of the battle that he boosts. You can retire him to countercharge, and he also gets an additional 5k. So he's a 13k booster, as well as a countercharger, as long as you've called something via your DivineZ unit skill, basically. So whether that's the Counterblast skill or the Divine skill itself, he will countercharge you, which is very important for this deck, because we not only need a CB for Alden, but we also need CB for either the Wisdom, if we want to do that, or the Sargis, which is the most important thing. So having that countercharge enableability to be able to attack with the Sargis and get that really big power spike is really, really good. And I was bouncing between 2 and 3 copies of Gragion, but I think 2 is reasonable, especially with like a top 7 check and the amount of filtering that we're doing in the deck with things like the Keter pile. I think 2 is reasonable for that. 3 kind of felt a bit too many, but 2 felt fine. Then to go alongside it, we also have 2 copies of Wedgewillin's Dragon. This is the Vanguard booster, basically, for Alden. The 15k booster, so you can get some good numbers with this, but the one thing I don't like about it is that it's a mandatory soul charge that you have to do when boosting, which is a little bit iffy. So it is handy to have, though, in the right circumstance, since you can go through your soul quite a bit with the T-Faults in the early game, as well as like, your Soul Blast for the Sodios in the right deck. So you do need to be careful there, but yeah, I think 2 of this is reasonable. Again, 3 just felt a bit too out of whack for me personally. And then finally for the grade 1s, we have 3 of our PGs and our 1 Elementaria, keeping it very simple. I still think Elementaria is like decent enough to hold on to just to get around random guard restricts, and also just, you know, Night Rose just came out recently, so that's good there. And Shiranui's in the meta, so I felt like this is still good enough to play. So yeah. So that's it for the grade 1s. So going into the triggers, we have the Blue OT. I feel like Blue OT is the most universal for this deck. just because with the build that I'm doing, focusing on the Sargeses for really big power gains, the critical pressure from the blue OT I feel like is the most it's the most reasonable choice for me. You can either do this or you could do like red OT. I think either of those are fine. But yeah, I feel like the crit pressure on the blue OT is just a little bit better for me personally. And then also you get to recycle something from the drop zone, which this deck doesn't recycle anything, so having that recurability is also pretty nice to have as well. Then to go alongside this, we do have some more crits to go with it. We have 8 crits in total, or regular crits, so 9 crits if you want to include the blue OT. Now, specifically with this, I decided to go for vanilla triggers because you can do something with the triggers early game, depending on the matchup, where you can call these down as attackers and boosters to make columns with. And then because of Alden's skill, being able to bounce units back to your hand, you can use him to use the Divine skill, call 2 things, and then call them over the triggers that you called earlier to then bounce them back to your hand, so that way you don't lose the shield value, but you manage to squeeze out an extra attack in the early game. So that's something cute that you can do with the Divine skill and the way that Alden works, to use your triggers as aggression tools as well. And that's where the vanillas are actually important, because their 5k bases make for better numbers. But there is also an argument for Blade Feather, because Blade Feather does provide you additional soul charge for the Resionels. But because I'm doing a Sarge's build, I already have enough soul charging outlets to consistently keep Resionel, live basically for the Soul Blast and the Restand. So yeah, so that is that. And then next we have 3 front triggers, which are just great. Always live pretty much in this deck to apply to your front row. And yeah, the 20k shields on these, real crisp, real crisp. Love a 20k guard. And last but not least, we have our 4 heal triggers to wrap the deck up. And yeah, pretty standard. But yeah, that's it for the deck. That's it for Alden. Like I said, the deck is enjoyable. It's another night deck. That is my thing with Vanguard. But yeah, this was a solid pick, I think, for the event for the BCS. But the reason I decided not to take it was simply just because when I was playtesting Undercover, I was just having so much more fun and enjoyment with that deck. I kind of didn't want to take Alden at that point. So yeah, I was just too hyped and too excited to play Undercover, took that to the event, and it's something that's a bit unexpected as well. And I think when I took it to the event, a lot of my opponents were kind of drawn back a bit because they weren't fully sure what my deck did, which kind of gave me a little bit of an advantage there, which was kind of cool. But yeah, overall, this deck is fun, it is nice, but again, it is another Keter pile deck, so I can understand people being a little frustrated with the deck and where it's at. But I do think it's one of the better Keter pile decks, just because the Tranquilla does let you consistently get to the grade 2s, like your Wisdom and your Tear Faults, so that's really good. But besides from that, yeah, that's it. So that is it for Alden. So the next video I'm going to do for you guys is a BCS coverage video about my Undercover deck and my rounds and how the event went. So yeah, of course I already posted that I went 4-3, but yeah, I'll go through the Undercover deck, and then we have set 6 to look forward to, where Undercover gets an update, which is when I'll do a proper deck profile video for that archetype and that deck. Since I kind of don't want to do like an outdated deck profile for something that's about to get support, if that makes sense. So yeah, anyway, that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. This is Guardian, signing out.